education has always been a social process by means of which a community, society, or nation has sought to transmit to the emergent question those traditional aspects of its culture which were considered fundamental and vital for its own stability and survival. Join me as I show you the educational origins and developments in Chinese, Egyptian, Arabic, and European cultures. By looking back through time, we discover the origins of contemporary educational institutions and methods of teaching and learning, and see how history can guide future practice. I'm going to show you our itinerary for today. Under ancient period, we are going to discover first the primitive period. Second is the Oriental period. Third is the Sumerian period. Fourth is the Egyptian education. And lastly is the Jewish education. Let's go back in time as we discover the ancient period. The first period under this is the primitive education, or also called as education for conformity. What do you think are the aims of primitive education? I'm giving you 10 seconds to think about it. Last 5 seconds. Okay, time's up. The main goal or the main aim of primitive education is to survive and to conform. To survive and to conform the tribe to which it belonged. Education among people was directed to ensure the survival of the group, the clan, or the people thought that the ways they were doing things were the best, and they wanted to preserve such and be transmitted to the incoming generation. Thus, another aim of primitive education, and that is the preservation and transmission of traditions. We have two types of education during the ancient period. The first one is the vocational and domestic training. This includes practical activities necessary to satisfy the immediate needs to stay alive, for example, for food, clothing, and shelter. The second one is religious education. It is consisted in learning how to participate in ritualistic practices to please or to appease the unseen spirits roaming around. There was no financing involved since there was no teacher to pay, no learning materials to buy, and no school building to construct, because education was strictly informal. What are the methods of instruction? Okay, so all instruction was done informally. First, we have observation and imitation. Education was through show me or tell me methods. Second is simple telling and demonstration. This is similar to lecture demonstrations nowadays. The parent told their children what they ought to do and then demonstrated how to do it. Examples are teaching their children how to make fire. Last is through participation. The children participated in the work of their parents and they learned. Participation was almost obligatory for everyone in the performance of religious rituals and ceremonies. After we discuss the types of education and methods of instruction, let's now proceed to the agencies of education. So we have two agencies. The first one is home. There was no formal agency for education. The family was the center for practical training. The father taught the boys duties of securing life, while the mother instructed the girls of household management. The next agency is the environment provided the primitive people a very good place of learning. For example, catching a fish through a wooden pointed object. Another example is making fire using stone. These are the effects of primitive education. So, culture was passed on and preserved for generations. Tribes were able to meet their economic needs and were able to survive. And lastly is people was able to adjust and adapt to political and social life. After we discovered the primitive education, it is now the time that we explore the Oriental education. And it is also called as education for social stability. The aims of this education vary from each country. First one is in China. In China, it aims to preserve and perpetuate ancestral tradition. Next is India. In India, it aims to preserve traditions of the caste system and religious beliefs. In Egypt, it aims to preserve religious traditions. And last is in Persia. It aims to strengthen military tradition. We have two types of Oriental education. The first one is the moral training or the social training of customs, duties, and polite behavior and ethical aspect of discipline. The second type is the theoretical and religious training in language and literature and religious beliefs. Let's now proceed to the methods of instructions. Schoolwork is chiefly memorization of texts. The method is direct imitation. It is consisted of being told what to do, to feel, or to think. The methods, however, such trial and error, conscious imitation, indoctrination, emphasize what to think and not what to think. Now, let's proceed to the agencies of education. And under this period is home. Home is the center for most ethical and social training, and other agencies are pagoda, temple, under the trees, or covered sheds. Okay, so third one in our itinerary is the Sumerian education, or education for business development. Sumeria was presently within Iraq, and Sumerians were Indo-Europeans. They settled first at the lower end of the rivers about 5000 BC at about 4000 BC. Okay, so we have 6 types of education during this period. The first one is the writing education. Their system of writing was cuneiform, and cuneiform writing was Sumeria's outstanding contribution to education and especially to civilization. This form of writing was later used by Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, and Egyptians. Second is the mathematical education. It includes counting and operations of low-digit numbers. And third type is the language education. It includes grammar, but the great bulk of the work was giving names to many things, thus enriching their vocabulary. Fourth is the vocational education. This was mainly apprenticeship for the workers, especially to the slaves. Next is professional education. The discovery of surgical instruments indicated that the Sumerians studied and practiced medicine and surgery. They also had law, astronomy, and architecture. Last type is the art education. They had poetry, epic, essays, fables, music, jewelry designing, sculpture, architecture, and etc. Now, let's talk about agencies of education. Archaeology discovered that a school existed in Sumeria around 2000 BC. It consisted of 6 rooms with 8 to 9 feet high. However, home is the first learning place for manual skills and social standards. Another school agency of education for the Sumerians is the temple schools. These schools were more elaborate than the lower schools. They had big walls where the scribes and young priests studied. On the other hand, the effectiveness of the apprentice schools was evidenced by highly skilled craftsmen in beautiful artworks in gold, silver, and copper, sculpture, architecture, and in metal works. Now, let's talk about the methods of instruction. The methods of instruction was mainly imitation and copying. The students just imitated or they are copying what the teacher had written. This was followed by minimal explanation. The main work of the learners was the preparation of tablets that dealt with their lessons. Okay, so after we explore the Sumerian, let's now go to Egypt. So ancient Egypt was the birthplace of one of the world's first civilization. And this advanced culture arose about 5,000 years ago in the Nile River in northeastern Africa. And it thrived for over 2,000 years and so became one of the longest lasting civilizations in history. Early Egyptian education, or also called as education for public administration, aims to train the scribes to be the most coveted profession at that time. It also aims to inculcate in the minds of the learners proper respect for the gods and the pharaoh, who was also considered as God. Preservation of cultural patterns was also another aim of Egyptian education. Those in charge of Egyptian education, the nobles and the priests, wanted to preserve their cultural patterns, and that is the Egyptian civilization. Religious education, vocational professional education, and military education are among the types of education in this period. Aside from these, education for public administration was for those who aspired for positions in the government, because the pharaoh needed many assistants to implement his desires. The writing, reading, and language education was another type of Egyptian education. The Egyptians used the hieroglyphics form of writing. Home, temple schools, military schools, court schools, and vocational schools are the agencies of education. Let's now explore the last education under ancient period. This is the Jewish education, or called education for discipline. This aims of education was ethical and religious. The education of the youth was an obligation of the parents and was intimately associated with the performance of ritual observance. The method of instruction was oral and learning by practice. Corporal punishment was regarded as an essential element in training. Added in our itinerary are the ancient Chinese and the early Hindu education. Let's now discuss first the ancient Chinese education. Ancient China followed a policy of isolation. They have no fear for invasion, for they have no intention to conquer. This country didn't care to associate with the rest of the world, but instead desired to live unto self. The Great Wall of China was built for protection against invaders. Ancestors' worship was also one important part of their lives. The method of learning consisted of repetition and memorization. The selection for government employment was made by rigorous system of examinations. Through this system, the civil service examination was originated. After Chinese, let's now discuss the Hindu education. And just a trivia, did you know that the yoga is one of the contributions of Hindu education? This is a set of mental and physical exercises designed to free the body so that the soul can unite with Brahma. Contents to be studied in this period. We have literature, dancing, linguistics, philosophy, theology, astronomy, history, grammar, law, medicine, mathematics, military training, and sports such as wrestling and archery.